Hello, guys. Welcome to Psych Minds. I'm back again with a new book. We are starting with Veronica Decides to Die by Paulo Coelho. I've read other books of Paulo Coelho. There was a phase during my teenage years where I would read different books by him, but it's been a while that I read any of his, and this is the book that I have not read yet. And we are going to start this. If you have not subscribed yet, do subscribe, like, and share if you like the content. Paulo Coelho, Veronica Decides to Die. The translation is from Portuguese to English by Margaret Joel Costa. For STDL, who began to help me without my realizing it. Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents, and nothing shall by means hurt you. Luke 10:19. On November 11, 1997, Veronica decided that the moment to kill herself had, at last, arrived. She carefully cleaned the room that she rented in a convent, turned off the heat, brushed her teeth, and lay down. She picked up the 4 packs of sleeping pills from her bedside table. Instead of crushing them and mixing them with water, she decided to take them one by one because there is always a gap between intention and action, and she wanted to feel free to turn back halfway. With each pill she swallowed, however, she felt more convinced. After 5 minutes, the packs were empty. Since she didn't know exactly how long it would take her to lose her consciousness, she had placed on the bed that month's issue of a French magazine, Home, which had just arrived in the library where she worked. She had no particular interest in computer science, but as she leafed through the magazine, she came across an article about the computer game, one of those CD-ROMs created by Paulo Coelho, a Brazilian writer she had happened to meet at a lecture in the cafe at the Grand Union Hotel. They had exchanged a few words, and she had ended up being invited by his publisher to join them for supper. There were a lot of people there, though, and they hadn't had a chance to talk in depth about anything. The fact that she had met the author led her to think that he was part of her world, and that reading an article about his work could help pass the time. While she was waiting for death, Veronica started reading about computer science, a subject in which she was not the least bit interested, but then that was in keeping with what she had done all her life, always looking for the easy option, for whatever was nearest at hand, like the magazine, for example. To her surprise, though, the first line of text shook her out of her natural passivity. The tranquilizer had not yet dissolved in her stomach, but Veronica was by nature passive, and for the first time in her life, it made her ponder the truth of a saying that was very fashionable among her friends: nothing in this world happens by chance. Why that first line at precisely the moment when she had begun to die? What was the hidden message she saw before her? Assuming there are such things as hidden message rather than mere coincidences. Underneath an illustration of the computer game, the journalist began his article by saying, "Where is Slovenia?" Slovenia. Honestly, she thought no one ever knows where Slovenia is, but Slovenia existed nonetheless, and it was outside, inside, in the mountains around her, and in the square she was looking out at. Slovenia was her country. She put the magazine to one side. There was no point now in getting indignant with a world that knew absolutely nothing about the Slovenes. Her nation's honor no longer concerned her. It was time to feel proud of herself, to recognize that she had been able to do this, that she had finally had the courage and was leaving this life. What joy! Also, she was doing it as she had always dreamed she would, by taking sleeping pills which leave no mark. Veronica had been trying to get hold of the pills for nearly 6 months. Thinking that she would never manage it, she had even considered slashing her wrists It didn't matter that the room would end up all awash in blood, and the nuns would be left feeling confused and troubled, for suicide demands that people think of themselves first and of others later. She was prepared to do all she could so that her death would cause as little upset as possible, but if slashing her wrist was the only way, then she had no option. And the nuns could clean up the room and quickly forget the whole story, otherwise, they would find it hard to rent out the room again. We may live at the end of the 20th century, but people still believe in ghosts. Obviously, she could have thrown herself off one of the few tall buildings in Jublajana, but what about the further suffering a fall from such a height would cause her parents? Apart from the shock of learning that their daughter had died, they would also have to identify a disfigured corpse. No, that was a worse solution than bleeding to death, because it would leave indelible marks on two people who only wanted the best for her. They would get upset to their daughter's death eventually, but it must be impossible to forget a shattered skull. Shooting, jumping off a high building, hanging, none of these options suited her feminine nature. Women, when they kill themselves, choose far more romantic methods, like slashing their wrists or taking an overdose of sleeping pills. Abandoned princesses and Hollywood actresses have provided numerous examples of this. Veronica knew that life was always a matter of waiting for the right moment to act, and so it proved to be that case. In response to her complaints that she could no longer sleep at night, two friends of hers managed to get hold of two packets each of a powerful drug used by musicians at a local nightclub. Veronica left the four packs on her bedside table for a week, quoting approaching death and saying goodbye entirely unsentimentally to what people call life. Now she was there, glad she had gone all the way and bored because she didn't know what to do with the little time that was left to her. She thought again about the absurd question she had just read. How could an article about computers begin with such an idiotic opening line? Where is Slovenia? Having nothing more interesting to do, she decided to read the whole article and she learned that the said computer game had been made in Slovenia, that strange country that no one seemed quite able to place except the people who lived there because it was a cheap source of labor. A few months before, when the product was launched, the French manufacturer had given a party for journalists from all over the world in a castle in Bled. Veronica remembered reading something about the party, which had been quite an event in the city, not just because the castle had been redecorated in order to match as closely as possible the medieval atmosphere of the CD Rome, but because the, of the controversy in the local press. Journalists from Germany, France, Britain, Italy, Spain had been invited, but not a single Slovene. Home's correspondent, who was visiting Slovenia for the first time, doubtless with all expenses paid, and determined to spend his visit talking to other journalists, making supposedly interesting comments, and enjoying the free food and drink at the castle, had decided to begin his article with a joke that must have appealed to the sophisticated intellectuals of his country. He had probably told his fellow journalists on the magazine various untrue stories about local customs too, and said how badly Slovene women dress. That was his problem. Veronica was dying, and she had other concerns, such as wondering if there was life after death, or when her body would be found. Nevertheless, or perhaps precisely because of the important decision she had taken, the article bothered her. She looked out of the convent window that gave onto the small square in Jublajana. If they don't know where Slovenia is, then Jublajana must be a myth, she thought, like Atlantis or Lemuria or the other lost continents that fill men's imaginations. No one anywhere in the world would begin an article asking where Mount Everest was, even if they had never been there. Yet, in the middle of Europe, a journalist on an important magazine felt no shame at asking such a question because he knew that most of his readers would not know where Slovenia is, still less its capital, Ljubljana. It was then that Veronica found a way of passing the time. Now that 10 minutes had gone by and she had still not noticed any physical changes, the final act of her life would be to write a letter to the magazine. explaining that Slovenia was one of the five republics into which the former Yugoslavia had been divided. The letter would be her suicide note. She would give no explanation of the real reasons for her death. When they find her body, they will conclude that she had killed herself because a magazine did not know where her country was. She laughed to think of the controversy in the newspapers, with some for and some against her suicide, committed in honor of her country's cause. And she was shocked by how quickly she could change her mind, since only moments before she had thought exactly the opposite, that the world and other geographical problems were no longer her concern. She wrote the letter. That moment of good humor almost made her have second thoughts about the need to die, but she had already taken the pills. It was too late to turn back. Anyway, she had had such moments before, and besides, she was not killing herself because she was a sad, embittered woman, constantly depressed. She had spent many afternoons walking joyfully along the streets of Jubaljana, or gazing from the window in her convent room at the snow falling on the small square with its statue of the poet. Once, for almost a month, she had felt as if she were walking on air, all because a complete stranger in the middle of that very square had given her a flower. She believed herself to be completely normal. Two very simple reasons lay behind her decision to die, and she was sure that were her were she to leave a note explaining, many people would agree with her. The first reason, everything in her life was the same, and once her youth was gone, it would be downhill all the way. With old age began to leave irreversible marks, the onset of illness, the departure of friends, she would gain nothing by continuing to live. Indeed, the likelihood of suffering would only increase. The second reason was more philosophical. Veronica read the newspapers, watched TV, and she was aware of what was going on in the world. Everything was wrong, and she had no way of putting things right. That gave her a sense of complete powerlessness. In a short while, though, she would have the final experience of her life, which promised to be very different: death. She wrote the letter to the magazine, then abandoned the topic and concentrated on more pressing matters, more appropriate to what she was living, or rather dying through at the moment. She tried to imagine what it would be like to die, but failed to reach any conclusion. Besides, there was no point worrying about that, for in a few moments she would find out. How many minutes? She had no idea. But she relished the thought that she was about to find out the answer to the question that everyone asked themselves: does God exist? Unlike many people, this had not been the great inner debate of her life. Under the old communist regime, the official line in schools had been that life ended with death, and she had gotten used to the idea. On the other hand, her parents' generation and her grandparents' generation still went to church, said prayers, and went on pilgrimages, and were utterly convinced that God listened to what they said. At 24, having experienced everything she could experience, and that was no small achievements, Veronica was almost certain that everything ended with death. That is why she had chosen suicide. Freedom at last, eternal oblivion. In her heart of hearts, though, there was still a doubt. What if God did exist? Thousands of years of civilization had made of suicide a taboo, an affront to all religious codes. Man struggles to survive, not to succumb. The human race must procreate. Society needs workers. A couple has to have a reason to stay together even when love has ceased to exist, and a country needs soldiers, politicians, and artists. If God exists, and I truly don't believe he does, he will know that there are limits to human understanding. He was the one who created this confusion in which there is poverty, injustice, greed, and loneliness. He doubtless had the best of intentions, but the results have proved disastrous. If God exists, he will be generous with those who chose to leave this earth early, and he might even apologize for having made us spend time here. To hell with taboos and superstition. Her devout mother would say, God knows the past, the present, and the future. In that case, he had placed her in this world in the full knowledge that she would end up killing herself, and he would not be shocked by her actions. Veronica began to feel a slight nausea, which became rapidly more intense. In a few moments, she would no longer be able to concentrate on the square outside her window. She knew it was winter. It must have been about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun was setting fast. She knew that other people would go on living. At that moment, a young man passed her window and saw her, utterly unaware that she was about to die. A group of Bolivian musicians, where is Bolivia? Why don't magazine articles ask that? Was playing in front of the statue of Franz Bresson, the great Slovenian poet who had made such a profound impact on the soul of his people. Would she live to hear the end of that music, drifting up from that square? It would be a beautiful memory of this life. The late afternoon, a melody recounting the dream of a country on the other side of the world, the warm, cozy room, the handsome young man passing by, full of life, who had decided to stop and was now standing, looking up at her. She realized that the pills were beginning to take effect and that he was the last person who would see her. He smiled. She returned his smile. She had nothing to lose. He waved. She decided to pretend she was looking at something else. The young man was going too far. Disconcerted, he continued on his way, forgetting that face at the window forever. But Veronica was glad to have felt desired by somebody one last time. She wasn't killing herself because of a lack of love. It wasn't because she felt unloved by her family and had money problems or an incurable disease. Veronica had decided to die on that lovely Jublajana afternoon with Bolivian musicians playing in the square with a young man passing by her window, and she was happy with what her eyes could see and her ears could hear. She was even happier that she would not have to go on seeing those same things for another 30, 40, or 50 years, because they would lose all their originality and be transformed into the tragedy of a life in which everything repeats itself and where one day is exactly like another. Her stomach was beginning to churn now, and she was feeling very ill indeed. It's odd, she thought. She thought, I thought an overdose of tranquilizers should have sent me straight to sleep. What she was experiencing, though, was a strange buzzing in her ears and a desire to vomit. If I throw up, I won't die. She decided not to think about the stabbing pains in her stomach and tried to concentrate on the rapidly falling night, on the Bolivians, on the people who were starting to shut up their shops and go home. The noise in her ear was becoming more and more strident, and for the first time since she had taken the pills, Veronica felt fear, a terrible fear of the unknown. It did not last long. Soon afterward, she lost consciousness. When she opened her eyes, Veronica did not think, this must be heaven. Heaven would never use a fluorescent tube to light a room, and the pain, which started a fraction of a second later, was typical of the earth. Ah, the earth pain. Unique, unmistakable. She tried to move, and the pain increased. A series of bright dots appeared, but even so, Veronica knew that those dots were not the stars of paradise but the consequence of the intense pain she was feeling. She's come to, she heard a woman say. You have landed slap bang in hell, so you'd better make the most of it. No, it couldn't be true. That voice was deceiving her. It wasn't hell because she felt really cold and she was aware of plastic tubes coming out of her nose and mouth. One of the tubes, the one stuck down her throat, made her feel as if she were choking. She made an attempt to remove it, but her arms were strapped down. I'm joking. It's not really hell. The voice went on. It's worse than hell. Not that I have ever actually been there. You are in Villette. Despite the pain and the choking feeling, Veronica realized at once what had happened. She had tried to kill herself and someone had arrived in time to save her. It could have been one of the nuns, a friend who had decided to drop by unannounced, someone delivering something she had forgotten she had ordered. The fact is, she had survived, and she was in Villette. Villette, the famous and much feared lunatic asylum, which had been in existence since 1991, the year of the country's independence. At that time, believing that the partition of the former Yugoslavia would be achieving through peaceful means, after all, Slovenia had only experienced 11 days of war. A group of European businessmen had obtained permission to set up a hospital for mental patients in the old barracks, abandoned because of high maintenance costs. Shortly afterwards, however, the works commenced. The first in Croatia, then in Bosnia. The businessmen were worried. The money for the investment came from capitalists scattered all around the globe, from people whose names they didn't even know, so there was no possibility of sitting down in front of them, offering a few excuses and asking them to be patient. They resolved the problem by adopting practices that were far from condemnable in a psychiatric hospital, and for the young nation that had just emerged from a benign communism, Villette came to symbolize all the worst aspects of capitalism. To be admitted to the hospital, all you needed was money. There was no shortage of people who, in their desire to get rid of some family members because of arguments over an inheritance or over that person's embarrassing behavior, were willing to pay large sums of money to obtain a medical report that would allow the internment of their problem children or parents, others fleeing from debts or trying to justify certain attitudes that could otherwise result in long prison sentences, spent a brief time in the asylum and then simply left without paying any penalty or undergoing any judicial process. Villette was the place from which no one had ever escaped, when where genuine lunatics sent there by the courts or by the other hospital mingled with those merely accused of insanity or those pretending to be insane. The result was utter confusion, and the press was constantly publishing tales of ill treatment and abuse, although they had never been given permission to visit Villette and see what was actually happening. The government was investigating the complaints but couldn't get no proof. The shareholders threatened to spread the word that foreign investment was difficult in Slovenia, and so the institution managed to remain afloat. Indeed, it went through strength to strength. It went from strength to strength. My aunt killed herself a month ago, the female voice continued. For almost 8 years, she was too afraid even to leave her room. Eating, getting fat, smoking, taking tranquilizers, and sleeping most of the time. She had two daughters and a husband who loved her. Veronica tried but failed to move her head in the direction of the voice. I only saw her fight back once when her husband took a lover. Then she kicked up a fuss, lost a few pounds, smashed some glasses, and for weeks on end kept the rest of the whole neighborhood awake with her shouting. Absurd thought it may seem, Absurd though it may seem, I think that was the happiest time of her life. She was fighting for something. She felt alive and capable of responding to the challenges facing her. What's all that got to do with me? Thought Veronica. Unable to say anything, I'm not your aunt and I haven't got a husband. In the end, her husband got rid of this lover, said the woman. And gradually, my aunt returned to her former passivity. One day, she phoned to say that she wanted to change her life. She had given up smoking. That same week, after increasing the number of tranquilizers she was taking because she had stopped smoking, she told everyone that she wanted to kill herself. No one believed her. Then one morning, she left a message on my machine saying goodbye and she gassed herself. I listened to that message several times. I had never heard her sound so calm, so resigned to her fate. She said she was neither happy nor unhappy, and that was why she couldn't go on. Veronica felt sorry for the woman telling the story, for she seemed to be doing so in an attempt to understand her aunt's death. In a world where everyone struggles to survive whatever the cost, how could one judge those people who decide to die? No one can judge. Each person knows the extent of their own suffering or the total absence of meaning in their lives. Veronica wanted to explain that, but instead, she choked on the tube in her mouth and the woman hurried to her aid. She saw the woman bending over her bound body, which was full of tubes and protected against her will. She openly expressed desire to destroy it. She moved her head from side to side, pleading with her eyes for them to remove the tubes and let her die in peace. "You are upset," said the woman. "I don't know if you are sorry about what you did or if you still want to die. That doesn't interest me. What interests me is doing my job. If the patient gets agitated, the regulations say I must give them a sedative." Veronica stopped struggling, but the nurse was already injecting something into her arm. Soon afterwards, she was back in a strange, dreamless world, where the only thing she could remember was the face of the woman, where the only thing she had just seen: green eyes, brown hair, and a very distant air, the air of someone doing things because she has to do them, never questioning why the rules say this to or that. Paulo Coelho heard about Veronica's story 3 months later when he was having supper in an Algerian restaurant in Paris with a Slovenian friend, also called Veronica, who happened to be the daughter of the doctor in charge at Villette. Later, when he decided to write a book about the subject, he considered changing his friend's name in order not to confuse the reader. He thought of calling her Blaska or Edvina or Meritza or some of the other Slovenian name, but he ended up keeping the real names. When he referred to his friend Veronica, he would call her his friend Veronica. When he referred to the other Veronica, there would be no need to describe her at all because she would be the central character in the book, and people would get irritated if they were always having to read Veronica the lunatic or Veronica the one who tried to commit suicide. Besides, both he and his friend Veronica would only take up a very brief part of the book, this one. His friend Veronica was horrified at what her father had done, especially bearing in mind that he was the director of an institution seeking respectability and was himself working on a thesis that would be judged by the conventional academic community. Do you know where the word asylum comes from? She was saying. It dates back to the Middle Ages. From a person's right to seek refuge in churches and other holy places, the right to asylum is something any civilized person can understand. So, why could my father, the director of an asylum, treat someone like that? Paulo Coelho wanted to know all the details of what had happened because he had a genuine reason for finding out about Veronica's story. The reason was the following. He himself had been committed to an asylum, or rather mental hospital as they were better known, and this had happened not once but 3 times in 1965, 1966, and 1967. The place where he had been interned was the Dr. Iras Sanatorium in Rio de Janeiro. Precisely why he had been committed to the hospital was something that even today he found odd. Perhaps his parents were confused by his unusual behavior. Half shy, half extrovert, he had the desire to be an artist, something that everyone in the family considered a perfect recipe for ending up a social outcast and dying in poverty. When Paulo Coelho thought about it, and it must be said, he rarely did, he considered the real madman to have been the doctor who had agreed to commit him for the flimsiest of reasons. As in any family, the tendency is always to place the blame on others and to state adamantly that the parents didn't know what they were doing when they made that drastic decision. Paulo laughed when he learned of the strange letters to the newspapers that Veronica had left behind, complaining that an important French magazine didn't even know where Slovenia was. No one would kill themselves over something like that. That's why the letter had no effect, said his friend Veronica, embarrassed. Yesterday, when I checked in at the hotel, the receptionist thought Slovenia was a town in Germany. He knew the feeling, for many foreigners believed the Argentine city of Buenos Aires to be the capital of Brazil. But apart from having foreigners blithely compliment him on the beauty of his country's capital city, which was to be found in the neighboring country of Argentina, Paulo Coelho shared with Veronica the fact just mentioned, but which is worth restating. He too had been committed to a mental hospital, and as his first wife had once remarked, should never have been let out. But he was let out, and when he left the sanatorium for the last time, determined never to go back, he had more made two promises. A, that he would one day write about the subject, and B, that he would wait until both his parents were dead before touching publicly on the issue because he didn't want to hurt them, since both had spent many years of their lives blaming themselves for what they had done. His mother had died in 1993, but his father, who had turned 84 in 1997, was still alive and in full possession of his mental faculties and his health, despite having emphysema, even though he's never smoked, and despite living entirely off frozen food because he couldn't get a housekeeper who would put up with his eccentricities. So when Paulo Coelho heard Veronica's story, he discovered a way of talking about the issue without breaking his promises. Even though he had never considered suicide, he had an intimate knowledge of the world of the mental hospital, the treatments, the relationships between doctor and patients, the comforts and anxieties of living in a place like that. So let us allow Paulo Coelho and his friend Veronica to leave this book for good, and let us get on with the story. That's kind of the start of the story. Veronica didn't know how long she had slept. She remembered waking up at one point, still with the life preserving tubes in her mouth and nose, and hearing a voice say, "Do you want me to masturbate you?" But now, looking around the room with her eyes wide open, she didn't know if that had been real or a hallucination. Apart from that one memory, she could remember nothing, absolutely nothing. The tubes had been taken out, but she still had needles stuck all over her body, wires connected to the areas around her heart and her head, and her arms were still strapped down. She was naked, covered only by a sheet, and she felt cold. But she was determined not to complain. The small area surrounded by green curtains was filled by the bed she was lying on, the machinery of the intensive care unit, and a white chair on which a nurse was sitting reading a book. This time, the woman had dark eyes and brown hair. Even so, Veronica was not sure if it was the same person she had talked to hours or was it days ago. "Can you unstrap my arm?" The nurse looked up, said a brusque no, and went back to her book. "I'm alive," thought Veronica. "Everything is going to start all over again. I'll have to stay in here for a while until they realize that I'm perfectly normal. Then they will let me out and I'll see the streets of Jublajana again, its main square, the bridges, the people going to and from work. Since people always tend to help others just so that they can feel they are better than they really are, they will give me my job back at the library. In time, I'll start frequenting the same bars and nightclubs. I'll talk to my friends about the injustices and problems of the world. I'll go to the movies and take walks around the lake. Since I only took sleeping pills, I'm not disfigured in any way. I'm still young, pretty, intelligent. I won't have any difficulty getting boyfriend. I never did. I'll make love with them in their houses or in the woods. I'll feel a certain degree of pleasure, but the moment I reach orgasm, the feeling of emptiness will return. We won't have much to talk about, and both he and I will know it. The time will come to make our excuses. It's late, or I have to get up early tomorrow. And we'll part as quickly as possible, avoiding looking each other in the eye. I'll go back to my rented room in the convent. I'll try to read a book, turn on the TV to see the old same old programs. Set the alarm clock to wake up at exactly the same time I woke up the day before and mechanically repeat my tasks at the library. I'll eat a sandwich in the park opposite the theater, sitting on the same bench along with the other people who also choose the same benches on which I to sit and have their lunch, people who all have the same vacant look but pretend to be pondering extremely important matters. Then I'll go back to work. I'll listen to the gossip about who's going out with whom, who's suffering from what, how such and such a person was in tears about her husband, and I'll be left with the feeling that I'm privileged. I'm pretty, I have a job, can have any boyfriend I choose. So I'll go back to the bars at the end of the day and the whole thing will start again. My mother, who must be out of her mind with worry over my suicide attempt, will recover from the shock and will keep asking me what I was going to do with my life, why I'm not the same as everyone else. Things really aren't as complicated as I think they are. Look at me, for example. I've been married to your father for years and I've tried to give you the best possible upbringing and set you the best possible example. One day I'll get tired of hearing her constantly repeating the same things, and to please her, I'll marry a man whom I oblige myself to love. He and I will end up finding a way of dreaming of a future together, a house in the country, children, our children's future. We'll make love often in the first year, less in the second, and after the third year, people perhaps think about sex only once every 2 weeks and transform that thought into action only once a month. Even worse, we'll barely talk. I'll force myself to accept the situation and I'll wonder what's wrong with me because he no longer takes any interest in me, ignores me, and does nothing but talk about his friends as if they were his real world. When the marriage is just about to fall apart, I'll get pregnant. We'll have a child, feel closer to each other for a while, and then the situations will go back to what it was before. I'll begin to put on weight like the aunt that nurse was talking about yesterday. Or was it days ago? I don't really know. And I'll start to go on diets, systematically defeated each week by the weight that keeps creeping up regardless of the controls I put on it. At that point, I'll take those magic pills that stop you from feeling depressed, and I'll have a few more children conceived during nights of love that pass all too quickly. I'll tell everyone that the children are my reason for living, when in reality, my life is their reason for living. People will always consider us a happy couple, and no one will know how much solitude, bitterness, and resignation lies beneath the surface happiness. Until one day, when my husband takes a lover for the first time, and I will perhaps kick up a fuss like the nurse's aunt, or think again of killing myself. By then, though, I'll be too old and cowardly, with two or three children who need my help, and I'll have to bring them up and help them find a place in the world before I can just abandon everything. I won't commit suicide. I'll make a scene. I'll threaten to leave and take the children with me, and like old men, my husband will back down. He'll tell me he loves me and that it won't happen again. It won't even occur to him that if I really did decide to leave, my only option would be to go back to my parents' house and stay there for the rest of my life, forced to listen to my mother going on and on all day about how I lost my one opportunity for being happy, that he was a wonderful husband despite his peccadillos, that my children would be traumatized by the separation. 2 or 3 years later, another woman will appear in his life. I'll find out because I saw them or because someone told me, but this time I'll pretend I don't know. I used up all my energy fighting against that other lover. I have no energy left. It's best to accept life as it really is and not as I imagined it to be. My mother was right. He will continue being a considerate husband. I will continue working at the library, eating my sandwich in the square opposite the theater, reading books. I never quite managed to finish watching television programs that are the same as they were 10, 20, 50 years ago. Except that I'll eat my sandwiches with a sense of guilt because I'm getting fatter. And I won't go to bars anymore because I have a husband except expecting me to come home and look after the children. After that, it's a matter of waiting for the children to grow up and to spend all day thinking about suicide without the courage to do anything about it. One fine day, I'll reach the conclusion that that's what life is like. There's no point worrying about it. Nothing will change and I'll accept it. Veronica brought her interior monologue to a close and made a promise to herself. She would not leave Villette alive. It was best to put an end to everything now while she was still brave and healthy enough to die. She fell asleep and woke up several times, noticing that the number of machines around her was diminishing. The warmth of her body was growing and the nurse's face kept changing. But there was always someone beside her. Through the green curtain, she heard the sound of someone crying, groans, or voices whispering in calm, technical tones. From time to time, a distant machine would buzz, and she would hear hurried footsteps along the corridor. Then the voices would lose their calm, technical tone and become tense, issuing rapid orders. In one of her lucid moments, a nurse asked her, "Don't you want to know how you are?" "I already know," replied Veronica. "And it has nothing to do with what you can see happening in my body, it's what's happening in my soul." The nurse tried to continue the conversation, but Veronica pretended to be asleep. Dark. When Veronica opened her eyes again for the first time, she realized that she had been moved. She was in what looked like a large ward. She still had an IV drip in her arm, but all the other wires and needles had been removed. A tall doctor, wearing the traditional white coat in sharp contrast to the artificial black of his dyed hair and beard, was standing at the foot of her bed. Besides him, a young junior doctor holding a clipboard was taking notes. "How long have I been here?" she asked, noticing that she spoke with some difficulty, slurring her words slightly. "You have been in this ward for 2 weeks after 5 days spent in the intensive care unit," replied the older man. "And just be careful that you are still here. And just be grateful that you are still here." The younger man seemed surprised, as if the final remark did not quite fit the facts. Veronica noticed his reaction at once, which alerted her instincts. Had she been here longer than she had thought? Was she still in some danger? She began to pay attention to each gesture, each movement the two men made. She knew it was pointless asking questions. They would never tell her the truth. But if she was clever, she could find out what was going on. "Tell me your name, address, marital status, and date of birth," the older man said. But she realized that there were blanks in her memory. She couldn't quite remember her address. The doctor shone a light in her eyes and examined them for a long time in silence. The young man did the same thing. They exchanged glances that meant absolutely nothing. "Did you say to the night nurse that we couldn't see into your soul?" asked the younger man. Veronica couldn't remember. She was having difficulty knowing who she was and what she was doing there. You have been kept in an artificially induced sleep with tranquilizers, and that might affect your memory a bit. But please try to answer all our questions. And the doctors began an absurd questionnaire wanting to know the names of the principal Jublana newspaper, the name of the poet whose statue was in the main square. Ah, that she would never forget. Even every Slovene has the image of Presern engraved on his or her soul. The color of her mother's hair, the names of her colleagues at work, the titles of the most popular books at the library. To begin with, Veronica considered not replying. Her memory was still confused, but as the questionnaire continued, she began reconstructing what she had forgotten. At one point, she remembered that she was now in a mental hospital and that the mad were not obliged to be coherent, but for her own good and to keep the doctors by her side at least so she can find out something more about her state, she began making a mental effort to respond. As she recited the name and facts, she was recovering not only her memory but also her personality, her desires, her way of seeing life. The idea of suicide, which that morning seemed to be buried beneath several layers of sedatives, resurfaced. Fine, said the older man at the end of the questionnaire. How much longer must I stay here? The younger man lowered his eyes, and she felt as if everything were hanging in the air, as if once that question was answered, a new chapter of her life would be written, and no one would be able to change it. You can tell her, said the older man. A lot of other patients have already heard the rumors, and she'll find out in the end anyway. It's impossible to keep secrets around here. Well, you decided your own fate, sighed the young man, weighing each word. So you had better known the consequences of your actions. During the coma brought on by the pills you took, your heart was irreversibly damaged. There was a necrosis of the ventricles. Put it in layman's terms, said the older man. Get straight to the point. Your heart was irreversibly damaged and soon it will stop beating altogether. What does that mean? She asked, frightened. If your heart stops beating, that means only one thing: death. I don't know what your religious beliefs are, but when will my heart stop beating? Asked Veronica, interrupting him. Within 5 days, a week at most. Veronica realized that behind his professional appearance and behavior, behind the concerned manner, the young man was taking immense pleasure in what he was saying, as if she deserved the punishment and would serve as an example to all the others. During her life, Veronica had noticed that a lot of people she knew would talk about the horrors in other people's lives as if they were genuinely trying to help them. But the truth was that they took pleasure in the suffering of others because that made them believe they were happy and that life had been generous with them. She hated that kind of person and she wasn't going to give the young man an opportunity to take advantage of his state in order to mask his own frustrations. She kept her eyes fixed on his and smiling said, "So I succeeded then." "Yes," came the reply, but any pleasure he had taken in giving her the tragic news had vanished. During the night, however, she began to feel afraid. It was one thing to die quickly after taking some pills, it was quite another to wait 5 days or a week for death to come, when she had already been through so much. She had always spent her life waiting for something, for her father to come back from work, for the letters from a lover that never arrived, for her end of year exams, for the train, the bus, the phone call, the holiday, the end of the holidays. Now she was going to have to wait for death, which had made an appointment with her. This could only happen to me. Normally, people die on precisely the day they least expect. She had to get out of there and get some more pills. If she couldn't, and the only solution was to jump from a high building in Jublajana, that's what she would do. She had tried to save her parents any unnecessary suffering, but now she had no option. She looked around. All the beds were occupied by sleeping people, some of whom were snoring loudly. There were bars on the windows. At the end of the ward, there was a small bright light that filled the place with strange shadows and meant that the ward could be kept under constant vigilance. Near the light, a woman was reading a book. These nurses must be very cultivated. They spend their whole lives reading. Veronica's bed was the farthest from the door. Between her and the woman, there were nearly 20 other beds. She got up with difficulty because if she was to believe what the doctor had said, she hadn't walked for nearly 3 weeks. The nurse looked up and saw the girl approaching, dragging her IV drip with her. I want to go to the toilet, she whispered, afraid of waking the mad woman. The woman gestured vaguely towards the door. Veronica's mind was working fast, looking everywhere for an escape route. A crack, a way out. It has to be quick, while they think I'm still too frail, incapable of acting. She peered about her. The toilet was a cubicle with no door. If she wanted to get out of there, she would have to grab the nurse and overpower her in order to get the key. But she was too weak for that. Is this a prison? She asked the nurse, who had stopped reading and was now watching her every movement. No, it's a mental hospital. But I'm not crazy. The woman laughed. That's what they all say. All right then, I am crazy, but what does that mean? The woman told Veronica not to stay too long on her feet and sent her back to her bed. What does it mean to be crazy? Insisted Veronica. Ask the doctor tomorrow, but go to sleep now. Otherwise, I'll have to give you a sedative, whether you want it or not. Veronica obeyed. On her way back, she heard someone whispering from one of the beds. Don't you know what it means to be crazy? For a moment, she considered ignoring the voice. She didn't want to make friends, to develop a social circle, to create allies for a great mass revolt. She had only one fixed idea: death. If she really couldn't escape, she would find some way to kill herself right there as soon as possible. But the women asked her the same question she had asked the nurse. Don't you know what it means to be crazy? Who are you? My name is Zetka. Go to your bed. Then, when the nurse thinks you are asleep, crawl back over here. Veronica returned to her bed and waited for the nurse to resume her reading. What did it mean to be crazy? She hadn't the slightest idea because the word was used in a completely anarchic way. People would say, for example, that certain sportsmen were crazy because they wanted to break records, or that artists were crazy because they led such strange and secure lives different from the lives of normal people. Then there were the thinly clad people walking the streets of Jubilajana in winter, whom Veronica had often seen pushing supermarket trolleys full of plastic bags and racks and proclaiming the end of the world. She didn't feel sleepy. According to the doctor, she had slept for almost a week, too long for someone who was used to living without great emotions but with rigid timetables for rest. What did it mean to be crazy? Perhaps she should ask one of the lunatics. Veronica crouched down, pulled the needle out of her arm, and went over to Zetka's bed. Trying to ignore her churning stomach, she didn't know if the feeling of nausea came from her weakened heart or the effort she was making to move. I don't know what it means to be crazy, whispered Veronica. But I'm not. I'm just a failed suicide. Anyone who lives in her own world is crazy. Like schizophrenic, psychopaths, maniacs. I mean, people who are different from other. Like you? On the other hand, Zetka continued, pretending not to have heard the remark, you have Einstein saying that there was no time or space, just a combination of the two. Or Columbus insisting that on the other side of the world lay not an abyss, but a continent. Or Edmund Hillary convinced that a man could reach the top of Everest. Or the Beatles, who created an entirely different sort of music and dressed like people from another time. Those people, and thousands of others, all lived in their own world. This mad woman talks a lot of sense, thought Veronica, remembering stories her mother used to tell her about saints who swore they had spoken to Jesus or the Virgin Mary. Did they live in a world apart? I once saw a woman wearing a low-cut dress. She had glazed look in her eyes and she was walking the streets of Jubla Jana when it was 5 degrees below zero. I thought she must be drunk and I went to help her, but she refused my offer to lend her my jacket. Perhaps it was in her world it was summer and her body was warmed by the desire of the person waiting for her. Even if that person only existed in her delirium, she had the right to live and die as she wanted, don't you think? Veronica didn't know what to say, but the mad woman's word made sense to her. Who knows? Perhaps she was the woman who had been seen half naked walking the streets of Jublajana. I'm going to tell you a story, said Zetka. A powerful wizard who wanted to destroy an entire kingdom placed a magic potion in the well from which all the inhabitants drank. Whoever drank that water would go mad. The following morning, the whole population drank from the well and they all went mad, apart from the king and his family who had a well set aside for them alone, which the magician had not managed to poison. The king was worried and tried to control the population by issuing a series of edicts governing security and public health. The policemen and the inspectors, however, had also drunk the poisoned water, and they thought the king's decision were absurd and resolved to take no notice of them. When the inhabitants of the kingdom heard these decrees, they became convinced that the king had gone mad and was now giving nonsensical orders. They marched on the castle and called for his abdication. In despair, the king prepared to step down from the throne, but the queen stopped him, saying, "Let us go and drink from the communal well, then we will be the same as them." And that was what they did. The queen and king drank the water of madness and immediately began talking nonsense. The subjects repented at once. Now that the king was displaying such wisdom, why not allow him to continue ruling the country? The country continued to live in peace, although its inhabitants behaved very differently from those of its neighbors, and the king was able to govern until the end of his days. Veronica laughed. "You don't seem crazy at all," she said. "But I am, although I'm undergoing treatment since my problem is that I lack a particular chemical. While I hope that the chemical gets rid of my chronic depression, I want to continue being crazy, living my life the way I dream it and not the way other people want it to be. Do you know what exists out there beyond the walls of Villette? People who have all drunk from the same well?" "Exactly," said Zetka. "They think they are normal because they all do the same thing. Well, I'm going to pretend that I have drunk from the same well as them. I already did that, and that's precisely my problem. I've never been depressed, never felt great joy or sadness, at least none that lasted. I have the same problems as everyone else." For a while, Zetka said nothing, then, "They told us you are going to die." Veronica hesitated for a moment. Could she trust this woman? She needed to take the risk. "Yes, within about 5 or 6 days. I keep wondering if there's a way of dying sooner. If you or someone else could get me some more pills, I'm sure my heart wouldn't survive this time. You must understand how awful it is to have to wait for death. You must help me." Before Zetka could reply, the nurse appeared with an injection. "I can give you the injection myself," she said. "Or depending on how you feel about it, I can ask the guards outside to help me." "Don't waste your energy," said Zetka to Veronica. "Save your strength. If you want to get what you asked me for." Veronica got up, went back to her bed, and allowed the nurse to do her work. It was her first normal day in the mental hospital. She left the ward, had some breakfast in the large refectory where men and women were eating together. She noticed how different it was from the way these people were usually depicted in films. Hysterical scenes, shouting, people making demented gestures. Everything seemed wrapped in an aura of oppressive silence. It seemed that no one wanted to share their inner world with strangers. After breakfast, which wasn't bad at all, no one could blame Villette's terrible reputation on the meals. They all went out to take the sun. In fact, there wasn't any sun. The temperature was below zero, and the garden was covered with snow. "I'm not here to preserve my life, but to lose it," said Veronica to one of the nurses. "You must still go out and take the sun." "You are the ones who are crazy. There isn't any sun." "But there is light, and that helps to calm the patients. Unfortunately, our winters last a long time. If it didn't, we would have a lot less work." It was useless arguing. She went out and walked a little, looking around her, surreptitiously seeking some way of escaping. The wall was high as required by builders of the old type of barracks, but the watchtowers for the sentries were empty. The garden was surrounded by a military looking building, which now housed the female and female wards, and the administrative office, the employees' room. After a first rapid inspection, she noticed that the only place that was really guarded was the main gate, where everyone who entered and left had their papers checked by two guards. Everything seemed to be falling into place in her mind again. In order to exercise her memory, she began trying to remember small things, like the place where she used to leave the key to her room, the record she had just bought, the last book she was asked for at the library. "I'm Zetka," said a woman approaching. The previous night, Veronica hadn't been able to see her face as fully. She had crouched down beside the bed all the time they were talking. Zetka must have been about 35 and seemed absolutely normal. "I hope the injection didn't bother you too much. After a while, the body gets habituated and the sedatives lose their effect." "I'm fine." About our conversation last night. Do you remember what you asked me? Of course I do. Zetka took her by the arm and they began to walk along together. Among the many leafless trees in the courtyard beyond the walls, you could see the mountains disappearing into the clouds. It's cold, but a lovely morning all the same, said Zetka. Oddly enough, I never used to suffer from depression on cold, grey, cloudy days like this. I felt as if nature was in harmony with me, that it reflected my soul. On the other hand, when the sun appeared, the children would come out to play in the streets and everyone was happy that it was such a lovely day. And then I would feel terrible, as if that display of exuberance in which I could not participate was somehow unfair. Delicately, Veronica detached herself from the woman. She didn't like physical contact. You didn't finish what you were saying. You were saying something about what I asked you last night. There's a group of people here, men and women who could have left, who could be back home, but who don't want to leave. There are many reasons for this. Willet isn't as bad as people say, although it's far from being a five-star hotel. Here inside, everyone can say what they like, do what they want without being criticized. After all, they are in a mental hospital. Then, when there are government inspections, these men and women behave like dangerous maniacs because some are here at the state's expense. The doctors know this, but there must be some order from the owners that allow the situation to continue because there are more vacancies than there are patients. Could they get hold of some pills for me? Try to contact them. They call their group the Fraternity. Zetka pointed to a woman with white hair who was talking animatedly with some younger woman. Her name is Marie. She belongs to the fraternity. Ask her. Veronica started walking towards Marie, but Zetka stopped her. No, not now. She's having fun. She's not going to stop something that gives her pleasure just to be nice to a complete stranger. If she should react badly, you will never have another chance to approach her. The insane always believe in first impressions. Veronica laughed at the way Zetka said the word insane, but she was worried too, because everything here seemed so natural, so nice. After so many years of going straight from work to a bar, from that bar to the bed of some lover, from his bed to her room, from her room to her mother's house, she was now experiencing something she had never dreamed of. A mental hospital, insanity, an insane asylum where people were not ashamed to say that they were crazy, where no one stopped doing something they were enjoying just to be nice to others. She began to doubt that Zetka was serious, or if it wasn't just a way by which mental patients could pretend that the world they lived in was better than that of others. But what did it matter? She was experiencing something interesting, different, totally unexpected. Imagine a place where people pretended to be crazy in order to do exactly what they want. At that precise moment, Veronica's heart turned over. She suddenly remembered what the doctor had said and she felt frightened. I want to walk alone a little, she said to Zetka. She was, after all, crazy too, and she no longer had to worry about pleasing anyone. The woman moved off, and Veronica stood looking at the mountains beyond the walls of Villet. A faint desire to live seemed about to surface, but Veronica determinedly pushed it away. I must get hold of those pills as soon as possible. She reflected on her situation there. It was far from ideal. Even if they allowed her to do all the crazy things she wanted to do, she wouldn't know where to start. She had never done anything crazy. After some time in the garden, everyone went back to the refectory and had lunch. Immediately afterward, the nurses led both men and women to a huge living room divided into lots of different areas. There were tables, chairs, sofas, a piano, a television, and large windows through which you could see the grey sky and the low clouds. None of the windows had bars on them because the room opened onto the garden. The doors were closed because of the cold, but all you had to do was turn the handle and you could go outside again, walk once more among the trees. Most people went and sat down in front of the television, others stared into space, others talked in low voices to themselves. But who has not done the same at some moment in their life? Veronica noticed that the older women, Marie, was now with a large group in one of the corners of the vast room. Some other patients were walking nearby, and Veronica tried to join them in order to eavesdrop on what the group members were saying. She tried to disguise her intentions as best as she could, but whenever she came close, they all fell silent and turned as one to look at her. What do you want? said an elderly man who seemed to be the leader of the fraternity, if such a group really existed, and Zetka was not actually crazier than she seemed. Nothing, I was just passing. They exchanged glances and made a few jerky gestures with their heads. One said to the other, "She was just passing." The other repeated the remark more loudly this time, and soon they were all shouting the same words. Veronica didn't know what to do and stood there paralyzed with fear. A burly, shifty looking male nurse came over, wanting to know what was going on. "Nothing," said one member of the group. "She was just passing. She's standing right there, but she's still just passing." The whole group burst into laughter. Veronica assumed an ironic air, smiled, turned, and moved off so that no one would notice that her eyes were filling with tears. She went straight out into the garden without bothering to put on a coat or jacket. A nurse tried to persuade her to come back inside, but another appeared soon after and whispered something in his ear. The two of them left her in peace in the cold. There was no point taking care of someone who was condemned to die. She was confused, tensed, irritated with herself. She had never allowed herself to be provoked. She had learned early that whenever a new situation presented itself, you had to remain cool and distant. Those crazy people, however, had managed to make her feel shame, fear, rage, a desire to murder them all, to wound them with words she hadn't dared to utter. Perhaps the pills or the treatment they had administered to get her out of her coma had transformed her into a frail woman. Incapable of fending for herself, she had confronted far worse situations in her adolescence, and yet for the first time she had been unable to hold back her tears. She needed to get back to the person she used to be, someone able to respond with irony, to pretend that the insults didn't bother her because she was better than all of them. Who in that group had had the courage to desire death? Who among them could teach her about life when they all were huddled behind the walls of Villette? She would never want to depend on their help for anything, even if she had to wait 5 or 6 days to die. One day is already gone. There are only another 4 or 5 left. She walked a little, letting the freezing cold enter her body and calm her blood that was flowing too fast, her heart that was beating too hard. Honestly, here I am, with my days literally numbered, giving importance to remarks made by people I have never even seen before, people who soon I'll never see again. And yet I suffer and get upset. I want to attack and defend. Why waste time? But she was wasting the little time left to her, fighting for her tiny bit of space in that strange community where you had to put up a fight if you didn't want others imposing their rules on you. I can't believe it. I never used to be like this. I never used to fight over stupid things. She stopped in the middle of the icy garden. It was precisely because she had found everything so stupid that she had ended up accepting what life had naturally imposed on her. In adolescence, she thought it was too early to choose. Now, in young adulthood, she was convinced it was too late to change. And what had she spent all her energies on until then? On trying to ensure that her life continued exactly as it always had. She had given up many of her desires so that her parents would continue to love her as they had when she was a child. Even though she knew that real love changes and grows with time and discovers new ways of expressing itself, one day when she had listened to her mother telling her in tears that her marriage was over, Veronica had sought out her father. She had cried, threatened, and finally extracted a promise from him that he would not leave home, never imagining the high price her parents would have to pay for this. When she decided to get a job, she rejected a tempting offer from a company that had just been set up in her recently created country in favor of a job at the public library where you didn't earn much money but you were secure. She went to work every day, always keeping to the same timetable, always making sure she wasn't perceived as a threat by her superiors. She was content, she didn't struggle, and so she didn't grow. All she wanted was her salary at the end of the month. She rented the room in the convent because the nuns required all tenants to be back at a certain hour and then they locked the door. Anyone still outside after that had to sleep on the street. She always had a genuine excuse to give boyfriends so as not to have to spend the night in hotel rooms or strange beds. When she used to dream of getting married, she imagined herself in a little house outside Jubilajana with a man quite different from her father, a man who earned enough to support his family, one who would be content just to be with her in a house with an open fire and to look out at the snow covered mountains. She had taught herself to give men a precise amount of pleasure, never more, never less, only what was necessary. She didn't get angry with anyone because that would mean having to react, having to do battle with the enemy, and then having to face unforeseen consequences such as vengeance. When she had achieved almost everything she wanted in life, she had reached the conclusion that her existence had no meaning because every day was the same and she had decided to die. Veronica went back in and walked over to the group gathered in one corner of the room. The people were talking animatedly but fell silent as soon as she approached. She went straight over to the oldest man, who seemed to be the leader. Before anyone could stop her, she gave him a resounding slap in the face. Aren't you going to react? She asked out loud, so that everyone in the room could hear her. Aren't you going to do something? No, the man said and passed a hand over his face. A little thread of blood ran from his nose. You won't be troubling us for very long. She left the living room and went triumphantly back to her ward. She had done something that she had never done in her entire life. 3 days had passed since the incident with the group that Zetka called the fraternity. Veronica regretted that slap not because she was afraid of the man's reaction, but because she had done something different. If she wasn't careful, she might end up convinced that life was worth living and that would cause her pointless pain, since she would soon have to leave this world anyway. Her only option was to keep away from everything and everyone, to try to be in every way as she had been before, to obey Willette's rules and regulations. She adapted herself to the routine imposed by the hospital, rising early, eating breakfast, going for a walk in the garden, having lunch, going to the living room for another walk in the garden, then supper, television, and bed. Before Veronica went to sleep, a nurse always appeared with medication. All the other women took pills. Veronica was the only one who was given an injection. She never complained, she just wanted to know why she was given so many sedatives since she had never had any problem sleeping. They explained that the injection was not a sedative but medication for her heart. And so, by falling in with that routine, her days in the hospital all began to seem the same. When the days are all the same, they pass more quickly. In another 2 or 3 days, she would no longer have to brush her teeth or comb her hair. Veronica noticed her heart growing rapidly weaker. She easily ran out of breath. She got pains in her chest. She had no appetite, and the slightest effort made her dizzy. After the incident with the fraternity, she had sometimes thought, if I had a choice, if I had understood earlier that the reason my days were all the same was because I wanted them like that, perhaps. But the reply was always the same. There is no perhaps because there is no choice. And her inner peace returned because everything had already been decided. During this period, she formed a relationship with Zetka, not a friendship because friendship requires a lot of time spent together and that wouldn't be possible. They used to play cards, which helps the time pass more rapidly, and sometimes they would walk together in silence in the garden. On one particular morning, immediately after breakfast, they all went out to take the sun, as the regulations demanded. A nurse, however, asked Zetka to go back to the ward because it was her treatment day. Veronica, who was having breakfast with her, heard the request. What treatment is that? It's an old treatment from the 60s, but the doctors think it might hasten my recovery. Do you want to come and watch? You said you were depressed. Isn't taking the medication enough to replace the chemicals you are lacking? Do you want to watch? Insisted Zetka. She was going to step outside the routine, thought Veronica. She was going to discover new things. When she didn't need to learn anything more, all she needed was patience. But her curiosity got the better of her and she nodded. This isn't a show, said the nurse. She's going to die. She's hardly seen anything. Let her come with us. That brings us to the end of today's reading. I will continue from this. There is no number of the chapter, so I'll say 48, page number 48. We'll continue from. We read from 3, 2, 1. Okay, 48. We'll continue. If you have any suggestions, recommendations, feedback, anything at all, you can tell me in the comment section of the video you're viewing or in the community section. Bye bye for now. Keep reading. Take care. Bye.